Evolution is the process by which living organisms change over time in response to their environment. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, not so fast. Evolution may have given us some amazing things like opposable thumbs, language, and memes, but it also gave us some pretty awful things like diseases, wars, and TikTok. This is the story of how we came to be. If you enjoy, be sure to subscribe. Imagine early Earth, about 3.5 billion years ago. Life was very simple back then. Just some tiny cells that could barely do anything. They were like the first version of Windows, slow, buggy, and prone to crashing. But these cells had one advantage: they could reproduce. By splitting in half, they could make more copies of themselves. This is called binary fission, and it's the simplest form of reproduction. It's also very boring. Imagine if you had to make babies by just cutting yourself in half. No romance, no fun, no Netflix and chill. Just split and go. Luckily, some cells decided to spice things up a bit. They started to stick together and form colonies. This gave them some benefits, like protection from predators and access to more resources. It also gave them some problems, like competition and conflict. It was like the early version of Facebook. You could connect with more people, but you also had to deal with more drama. Some colonies became more complex and specialized over time. They developed different types of cells that performed different functions. Some cells became sensors, some became movers, some became digesters, and so on. This is called differentiation, and it's the basis of multicellular life. It's also very smart. Imagine if you had different parts of your body that could do different things. Oh wait, you do. As multicellular life evolved, it diversified into many different shapes and forms. Some became plants, some became animals, some became fungi, and some became other weird things that we don't even have names for. This is called diversification, and it's the result of natural selection. It's also very creative. Imagine if you could change your appearance and abilities depending on your environment and needs. Some animals decided to move from the water to the land. This was a big challenge, because they had to adapt to a whole new set of conditions. They had to breathe air, walk on legs, avoid predators, and find food. This is called terrestrialization, and it's the origin of land animals. It's also very brave. It's like moving from your parents' basement to your own apartment. Some land animals evolved into mammals. These were warm-blooded creatures that had fur, milk, and live birth. They also had larger brains and more complex behaviors than their reptilian ancestors. This is called mammalization. This was the emergence of mammals. They were also very cuddly. Some mammals evolved into primates. These were tree-dwelling animals that had opposable thumbs, binocular vision, and social groups. They also had even larger brains and more advanced skills than their mammalian cousins. This was the rise of primates. It's also very cool. Some primates evolved into hominids. These were bipedal apes that walked upright on 2 legs instead of 4. They also had smaller teeth, flatter faces, and bigger brains than their primate relatives. This was the origin of humans. It's also very weird. Some hominids evolved into different species of humans. These were modern-looking beings that had larger brains, smaller bodies, and more sophisticated tools than their hominid ancestors. They also had different cultures, languages, and lifestyles than their human cousins. This is called speciation, and it's the diversification of humans. It's also very fascinating. Some of the human species that emerged were Homo Erectus, Homo habilis, Homo fluoresciensis, Homo Neanderthalensis, and Homo Sapiens. Each of these species had their own unique features and adaptations that helped them survive and thrive in their environments. They also had their own challenges and struggles that they had to overcome or cope with. Let's take a closer look at some of them. The Homo erectus. It's one of the oldest human species on Earth. It lived from about 2 million to 100,000 years ago. It had a large brain, a small jaw, and a tall body. It was the first human to use fire, cook food, and make complex tools. It was also the first human to migrate out of Africa and colonize other continents. It's like the first version of an explorer. It traveled far and wide and discovered new lands and resources. It's also very adventurous. It faced many dangers and hardships along the way. The Homo habilis. It's one of the earliest human species on Earth. It lived from about 2.4 to 1.4 million years ago. It had a small brain, a large jaw, and a short body. It was the first human to make stone tools by chipping flakes off rocks. It used these tools to cut meat, crack nuts, and dig roots. It's like the first version of a handyman. It made useful things out of simple materials. It's also very resourceful. It used whatever it could find to survive. The Homo Fluoresciensis. It's one of the most mysterious human species on Earth. It lived from about 100,000 to 50,000 years ago. It had a small brain, a small jaw, and a very small body. It was only about 3 feet tall and weighed about 50 pounds. It lived on an island in Indonesia where it hunted dwarf elephants and giant rats. It's like the first version of a hobbit. It was tiny and lived in a fantasy world full of strange creatures. It's also very curious. It must have wondered what else was out there beyond its island. There was also Homo Neanderthalensis. It's one of the most famous human species on Earth. It lived from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. It had a large brain, a large jaw, and a muscular body. It was adapted to cold climate. Sand had thick hair, a wide nose, and a stocky build. It made sophisticated tools, buried its dead, and may have had art and language. It's like the first version of a caveman. It was strong and smart and lived in caves. It's also very misunderstood. It was not a brute or a savage or an ancestor of modern humans. It was a cousin and a rival and sometimes a lover. That finally brings us to us, Homo Sapiens, the only member of our genetic family to not yet become extinct. This was a result of many factors, such as climate change, competition, migration, and interbreeding. The only human species that survived until today is Homo sapiens, which means wise man in Latin. This is called extinction and survival, and it's the history of human evolution. It's also very humbling. Imagine if you were the last of your kind, and you had to carry on the legacy of your ancestors. And that's how we went from single-celled life to Homo sapiens in just a few billion years. It's been a long and amazing journey, full of ups and downs, triumphs and tragedies, joys and sorrows. We have learned a lot, but we still have a lot to learn. We have done a lot, but we still have a lot to do. We have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Thank you for watching the history of human evolution. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, stay curious, stay humble, and stay human.